Should South Korea still continue maintaining alliance with the US and
How independent Korea can be when it's in the relationship with China.
China can help South Korea in denuclearizing North Korea and become our ally.
Whether or not South Korea can be a factor that keeps the safety of the Asia.
Will China play an active role in the crisis of the Korean Peninsula?
Is it an opportunity or is it a challenge for these two countries to have a more cooperation?
3 inter-Korean summits. First ever summit between leaders of North Korea and the United States. Yet short of bringing peace and stability in Northeast Asia.
We start with a major breaking news.
North Korea launched more projectiles, so believes the regime may have tested short-range missiles today.
North Korea firing multiple short-range projectiles.
Beijing. Not only is China the world's most populous nation in the world at 1.4 billion and growing,
it's one of the few remaining allies of North Korea, arguably one that has the most leverage on the Kim Jong-un regime, and one of the biggest trading partners of South Korea.
as South Korea looks to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula through North Korean denuclearization.
The rumbling U.S.-China trade dispute is turning quickly into a full-blown tech war.
Now, the trade war between the U.S. and China.
President Trump has issued an executive order.
Trade talks between the U.S. and China nearly ground to a halt this past week.
Increasingly posing implications for South Korea, torn in between. Where do the two key Asian players stand in terms of their bilateral relations, especially as they seek to mend ties following a diplomatic feud over THAAD? South Korea-China ties today in 2019, and what lies ahead? We partnered up with the CGTN for a razor-sharp analysis.
China-South Korean ties are on a more even footing with the lowering of tensions over THAAD. The two countries celebrated the 10th anniversary of the strategic partnership in 2018 and are working to expand cooperation and strengthen communication on issues of the Korean Peninsula. Still, how hard is it to restore trust in an already tense region? What is the outlook on denuclearization of the peninsula?
And what's next for regional economic integration in Northeast Asia?
To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy today to be joined here by our co-host, Jennifer Moon from South Korea's Arirang TV. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello there. Well, thank you so much for the invite. We're delighted to be joining you here at the CGTN headquarters in Beijing.
Meanwhile, we are very happy to be joined here by two distinguished guest speakers. One is Dr. Li Gung from the ROK and Professor Rong Ying from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to our discussion here.
Well, since we're on the topic, why don't we discuss the issues following up on the THAAD standoff that South Korea and China have decided to mend their ties after that. Now, are we completely over that, or do effects still linger? How do you feel?
I think the issue is not completely over yet, but the THAAD issue is at the moment is under the surface. But there is a possibility that it's going to resurface again if and when North Korea use its own provocation card again. For example, if North Korea launches another missile, if North Korea tests its nuclear capability again, then there is going to be a lot of South Korea's public opinion to do something against it. Therefore, I think it is very, very imperative for both South Korea and China to cooperate to persuade North Korea that launching of another missile or nuclear test would not help solving the problems of nuclear programs on the Korean Peninsula, as well as the security dynamics of Northeast Asia.
But Mr. Rong Ying, do you think the latest test of two short-range missiles by the DPRK is a result of the walk by President Trump from Hanoi without signing an agreement with his North Korean counterpart?
Well, certainly I think this is the background of that recent development and particularly I think the two testings by the North Korea. But of course we have to look beyond and look in a way that the the stalled sort of process of denuclearization and the slow or no implementation of the agreements between North Korea and the United States. The June 12th joint statement, in which the two sides committed to complete denuclearization by the North Korea and to work together for a kind of new peace regime on the Northeast Asia. A good lesson need to learn. I think the Chinese side made it very clear at this moment that the two sides, a relevant side, if I can say, should draw the correct lessons, but more importantly, work together with the support of the countries in the region for a roadmap to implement.
Right. I think that is very correct and clear. But Dr. Lee, do you think that South Korea and North Korea, from the perspective of the South Koreans, are in a position that we're comfortable enough to go beyond the THAAD installation, work to perhaps go without that?
In other words, do you think President Moon Jae-in is ready to claim the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I thought it was President Trump who was to claim that. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the Nobel laureate will be decided by the people in Norway, so I don't have any opinion on that.
You may cast the vote if you like.
Well, I sincerely hope that President Moon will, be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, but you never know. With regard to the issue of THAAD, as I said, the issue of THAAD is not only a problem between South Korea and China, but also this is a problem between USA and China, involving all the regional powers in Northeast Asia. Therefore, we have to handle this issue very carefully. First of all, I think the real trigger for the next crisis involving THAAD would be, as I said, the North Korea's provocation. Therefore, it is very important to proceed with the current negotiation with North Korea to denuclearize North Korea. And in order to do that, I think we need to come up with a very clear definition of certain things, because we have started this negotiation without a clarity of some of the very important concepts. For example, what is the definition of denuclearization? What is the definition of denuclearization on the Korean peninsula rather than denuclearization of North Korea? Then, what is the end state that we are aiming for? Of course, the USA has already expressed its opinion about end state of all the roadmap, which is going to be either CVID or FFVD, if you will. But North Korea has not revealed its own vision of the end state. Particularly, I'm very curious about North Korea's post-nuclear vision of its own security guarantee. They haven't said anything about what to do after denuclearization. How are they going to guarantee their own security? And there's, again, not a very clear evidence of North Korea's willingness to denuclearize. For example, the complete list of North Korea's nuclear program.
But what do you think of the positive signs, for example, from the American side, in terms of holding the annual military war games with South Koreans? They have ceased to host such war games on the doorsteps of the DPRK, so that President Kim Jong-un might feel a little bit relaxed. What do you think of this kind of preparations for more chapters following Hanoi?
On that military exercise, I'm not sure whether it was ceased or suspended. As a matter of fact, I think there recently, the UK and the US conducted on a smaller scale, yes. or with different nature or different names sometimes. So the security issues indeed is there. Talking about the security assurances, security guarantees that North Korea is looking for, I think certainly it is the issue. It is the issue, and it is the defining issues. But as I said, that we have a lot of experience. We have a lot of lessons to learn. Focusing on that will lead to nowhere. That is a lesson for me. I think we have to learn. The positive side, talking about that, for the past years, which the peace, the process of talk, or if I say the process, political solution, the process political solution on the question of North Korea, is that all the parties, directly concerned, say the IE, North Korea and the US, including, I think, the other parties, I mean, ROK, China, and others, all agreed that there's no way except talks to address this issue. And for that, they have a summit, reached a joint statement, not only between US and China, and North Korea, but also with the inter-Korean.
My question for my
So
South
this is the
Korean
importance.
counterpart, Jennifer, is whether we have a regional security mechanism such as six-party talks or like a Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. What are your thoughts, Jennifer?
Well, as for the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity, it's of course a very different nature from the six-party talks, where the six-party talks is an international framework in which the six parties would try to denuclearize or bring North Korea to the negotiations table for denuclearization. Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity is more of an academic forum, I believe. Now, my question that I want to lay out there for both of you experts is whether we're on the right track for denuclearization of North Korea. I mean, with the latest developments on this front, and of course, North Korea, however, firing its 2 short-range missiles, are we on the right track to denuclearize North Korea?
Dr. Lee.
I agree with you that we have to take a very innovative new path. You know, we have to learn lessons from the past. Therefore, I would argue that with a very clear understanding of where our goalpost is, we have to move ahead with involving the leaders of the countries. Otherwise, we would not know where we are heading, and we don't know, after taking the road, we don't know whether or not we have enough fuel. We don't know whether or not we have a map. But at the same time, we have to move forward. And in order to do that, either side of the peninsula should refrain from provoking each other. Therefore, the military exercise, joint US-ROK military exercise, they have been reduced in terms of scale. So we have given up a very large-scale military exercise like Key Resolve or Eagle or UFG. The exercise that we have done for the past few months was a very reduced-scale exercise. And I'm sure that North Korea was, to a certain extent, provoked by our exercise. But for that particular reason, we have the so-called hotline. We have a telephone communication line between, our Blue House and on the desk of Chairman Kim. We have to use those kinds of confidence-building measures more often.
Forgive me for singling out this issue for our discussion today, because the United States is so superpower following the Soviet disintegration back in the early 1990s, and a trade war is well underway. Whether South Korea would have to take side in this trade war?
I will say that we should support the so-called liberal international order. The international order should be open. It has to be liberal. The multilateralism should be the champion of the order by abiding by institutional norms and principles and international law. I think that has been, our, norms, normalcy for the past, 30 or 40 years, and we should keep that particular liberal international order. In that sense, I think President Trump, in the future will be retaliated by the market. I think market forces are very, very strong. The stock market will crash, there will be capital flight. So the market forces will, in the future, I think, will retaliate against President Trump.
Definitely, markets fluctuate because of this particular trade dispute. And of course, because the world's 2 largest economies are in such a trade dispute, it will eventually trickle down to other economies such as South Korea, as we are big trade partners with both China and the US. I'd like to know China's stance on this trade dispute.
Well, I think the trade, dispute, or it's been something I think very unfortunate, certainly for China and the U.S. and also for the region and the world as a whole. I think the situation we are having now is something I think China does not want to see. And before I think the recent sort of episode of the trade dispute, retaliation and tariff, there were hope, there were actually expectation that the 11 round of talks would lead to some conclusion. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. And that was exactly because provoked by the United States. the announcement, even the starting of the recent round of talks. So China, despite that, China still showed its sincerity and it showed its readiness to work with the United States to find a solution to that. Now, what we are going to want to see is that I think from China's perspective, we hope the United States would come out of, go beyond that unilateral, that American first sort of approach to take its responsibility as a leading power, as a superpower, as the largest economy in the world, and taking into account the concerns of countries, even like South Korea and others, that what its policy has implications and impacts for the region and beyond. That is exactly what the Chinese are saying. The bilateral trade issues is not just bilateral. It is going to have implications, impacts for the region and beyond. China is taking the responsibility, but it takes two to tango.
I think this is not the first time that U.S. has taken the unilateral approach to the global issues. In the past, Nixon administration was very unilateral. Reagan administration was very unilateral. Then George W. Bush, the second Bush, was very unilateral. And now this time, President Trump becomes very unilateral. But every time, the market restored the liberal international order. So there is a hope.
It seems that President Trump, through his Twitters, expecting that. Yeah, his meeting.
Are you a fan of his presidency?
I'm not so much, but I have to. I have to follow his, try to understand.
His theory is very interesting.
So
Jennifer, you'll be following the presidential tweet of Donald Trump?
Well,
and it's a roller coaster presidency.
It gets me up in the middle of the night, So, and we get to find it out through Twitter. And that's what happens. But that is a question that I really like to know from the South Korea's perspective. Do we see a semi-conclusion, at least at the Osaka G20 summit, during the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump? Do we expect some kind of a conclusion or closure to come there? And how will South Korea react to this? Obviously, we are very much affected by this.
I think China's position is very clear. As I said that, and as which is known to all, that if U.S. want to talk, let's talk. If U.S. want to do different way, China is ready. So I think
that's the editorial of the People's Daily.
This is the position of the China has been very consistent ever beginning. At the beginning of this so-called trade dispute or trade talks. So if the U.S. or President Trump himself, take it as a tactics for negotiations, then that's fine. China is ready. But if it is, as want to do in a different way, China is also have to get prepared for that. So we have to be hopeful, and we are hopeful. In the end, that we have to find a way to address these issues and through talks.
But Jennifer raised a very interesting question as to what South Korea can do to help ease the tensions so that we can further the regional integration between Japan, ROK, and China.
Actually, my question was, I don't know whether South Korea is in the position to actually change the game here, this game between China.
But you're an ally of the United States, so you can say something.
Oh yes,
right?
We're definitely an ally, I must say.
Very sovereign,
we're an ally
state.
of the U.S., good friends with China, as you know.
That's the message the Jeju Forum delivers every year.
But I'd like to know how this will affect South Korea and what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's going to affect South Korea very, very heavily. If there is a trade war between those two superpowers, South Korea's economy will be very heavily affected.
Of course, South Korea became the first country to commercialize 5G, beating our U.S. competitor, right?
5G is just an infrastructure. This is a communication a network, the very high-speed communication network. But what is important is what can we make use out of it. The 5G network. I think China is a lot ahead of South Korea. I think the U.S. is also concerned about Chinese competitiveness because, first of all, the big data that you can collect, and also the increasing capability of artificial intelligence and all the related digital revolution that you are experiencing. Therefore, South Korea is not only a competitor, but we are very concerned. So I hope we can have a very cooperative relations between South Korea and China. And I hope we can have your big data as a kind of public good for the countries in East
Yes,
Asia.
very much so. We can have a very hostile or benevolent competition between the two giants, Huawei and Samsung. What do you have to say about the Huawei issue?
We are talking about the worst case scenario where there's a competition, now even in technology aspect. I agree with Professor Lee that it also provides an opportunity that countries like in the region, China and ROK, and including other countries, we'll talk about Japan and others, which are all innovative. We are very much emphasizing innovation, can work together to address the challenges raised by the development technology. We're talking about the industrialization 4.0 and talking about this. So while these companies, they are competing for markets, they are competing for technology, but the countries, the government in the region should work together to find a way to address so that the benefits of the development technology will be shared by the countries in the region. And we can also serve an example to help countries, other regions in Asia and beyond to, reap the benefits of the development technology.
Well, we're obviously heading into an uncharted territory of fourth industrial revolution and all these fifth generation technology, all these technologies that we've never seen before, unprecedented speed as well. Does this require us to set another global standard for these kind of technology? And what are the concerns there?
Whether South Korea will have to take side. Because you would obviously come under fire and the pressure from Washington not to use any part of the Chinese, not using any Chinese part in the global supply chain.
First of all, South Korea does not want to be dependent upon any of this, superpower standard. I hope we can make side with a country that has a very clear ethics principles, that has a very clear protection of privacy, that has transparency, the ethical issues, as well as sharing of the public good, as Professor said. We should make big data the public good of all the countries involved. So we are going to side with a country that has such a value.
Thank you so much for being part of this meaningful dialogue. The THAAD issue, which most of the Chinese would agree, let's turn the page, let's move on, let's adopt a forward-looking attitude.
Well, as for that, we've been in Korea, we've been seeing more Chinese tourists return to Korea. So I think it's a sign that we're actually moving beyond that. And I'd like to keep my fingers crossed that we will move beyond that and restore relations between the two countries. As for this session, I'm sure Dr. Lee agrees with me, but it was a very delightful session for us as well, that we got to have this candid discussion with our partners at CGT. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice discussion.
And we hope the next time you'll be in Seoul to discuss and pick up on this discussion.
Great expectations and Tale of Two Cities. And see you next time.